Operation Flamestrike was a free online event Corvus Beli ran in association with Beasts of War, now known as On Tabletop. Flamestrike was the first large community event for Infinity's 3rd edition, coming in the summer of 2016, about a year after the release of N3. Much of the documentation is gone, including the website that was used to host the battle reports and missions. I've cobbled things together from PDFs, battle reports on YouTube, and a few first-hand accounts, but the majority of the bat reps were simply not preserved. 2016 was a long time ago in the myopic world of board games. It was a different time after all. The Rio Olympics, the Brexit referendum, Pokemon Go, violence in America, Harambe, Damn Daniel, Overwatch. I myself was playing Infinity back then, but getting people to play was difficult, and there wasn't anyone committed enough with whom I wanted to try the campaign missions, and I didn't have the attention span to join the various online groups. Those online groups were a big part of the event. There was a mixture of diplomacy and strategy occurring at high levels. Facebook groups would decide where to strike and where to avoid. For example, if you were playing Jing, you really wanted to defend Zurong Island, and many Jing players made overtures to other factions via social media. PanOceania might say, "You get Agoge Center, just don't try to fight us for Sagres." Although many of those groups and battle reports are gone, there are both primary and secondary sources from the event still available. Beasts of War hosted a video breakdown, and thanks to Huron Blockhart on Reddit, I obtained the PDF handouts. I've linked them in the description. If you participated or had thoughts, then I would love for any veterans of the FLAMIA Island campaign to comment with their experience, so please leave a message below if any juicy memories come to mind. The event itself was a 10-week ordeal. If you wanted to participate, all you had to do was to sign up, find someone, and play a regular game of Infinity against them. The mission would depend on where and when you two were fighting. Ideally, you'd have gotten in touch with one of those forums or social groups to choose an opportune target. You wouldn't want to be the only strike team from the Nomads fighting for Sagres Island when the rest of your faction is making a big push for Tianxian City. After the game, one or both players would post a battle report on a specially designed website. The objective points that were gained would affect control in real time, and the end results would permanently change the fortunes of the factions in the universe. It's all very cool stuff. Unfortunately, there was an issue: cheating. A big part of the post-game video and discussion was all about cheating. There are rumors that it got worse in the successive years, with people making all kinds of wild claims and sometimes even copy-pasting their own battle reports in the 2018 and 2019 campaigns. To try to keep people honest, the Beasts of War crew used some opaque metrics to determine the veracity. There were thousands of bat reps to examine, so I don't know how they did things exactly. The reports that were considered legitimate were kept, and those that were not were treated as propaganda campaigns. And there were some upsets, and even a few big differences in locations between the reported numbers and what Beasts of War decided were the real results. The largest discrepancies were at Antella, Zhurong, and Tianshan. Ultimately, the event went pretty well and was fairly popular from what I can see. Corvus Beli saw it as good enough to run several more in the succeeding years, including Strike Zone Wotan, Kurage Crisis, and Asteroid Blues. We haven't seen campaigns in 2020 or 2021, but I am hopeful we'll get more in the future. They've had world events and Kickstarters taking up their energy, but if anyone from Corvus Beli is listening, you should absolutely run another global campaign. I'll make videos for it. The narrative of Operation Flamestrike is set in the year 66 NC, 1 year after the events of Campaign Paradiso in about 65 NC. Tensions had cooled since the Paradiso affairs. There were a few raids by combined army forces, as well as endless shadow operations between the coordinated command powers, but the war was frozen, and battle lines were not shifting. One morning, the EI forces launched an attack on FLAMIA Island, a region far removed from the human power's defenses. O12 referred to this as Operation Flamestrike. The island had a long and bloody history before the combined army ever showed up. FLAMIA Island is halfway between the continent of Norstralia and the PanOceania-controlled island of Molokai. Molokai was named after one of the islands in the Hawaiian archipelago on Earth, and was critical to PanOceania's presence in the Paradiso system. Ever eager to protect its investments, the government of Pano lobbied O12 to allow them to settle and colonize FLAMIA Island. These efforts were constantly blocked by Jing, which sent its own groups of settlers and garrisons to complicate the issue. At the outbreak of the Neo-Colonial Wars in the year 42, PanOceania launched a blitzkrieg to overwhelm and seize the island outright. PanOceania destroyed the Jing airfields and hunkered down, setting up anti-naval and anti-air defenses to guard their prize. At the conclusion of the First War, PanOceania annexed it outright. However, during the second phase of the wars, the State Empire reacted with an audacious orbital insertion. This counterattack was so sudden that it bottled PanOceania into the southern tip of FLAMIA Island. Almost every Tiger soldier in the Empire participated in the invasion, giving them the fearsome reputation that they enjoy as the human sphere's premier drop troops. PanOceania was unable to devote the resources that they needed to retake the island. By this point, other powers had also joined the war, including Islam. During the third and final phase of the Neo-Colonial Wars, PanOceania attempted a desperate breakout. Bakhmari troops are named after ancient clans of tiger hunters, and they were true to their namesake. Units led by Bakhmari commandos performed a series of encircling operations. PanOceania had almost taken their prize, but they were stopped by a third party. The Nomad Military Force and Sword of Allah had combined for a joint operation that took the western spaceport of Tianxian before PanOceania could complete their encirclement. Shortly after, in the year 51, O12 stepped in and brought an end to the conflict via the Peace of Concilium. After the Neo-Colonial Wars, FLAMIA Island was a demilitarized zone. It was administered as a neutral territory under direct O12 rule, much like the Free City of Jerusalem or Vancouver in North America. Military personnel were to be kept on standby, not permitted to leave their respective zones until the conflict could be resolved through legal means. That said, there was no possible timeline for when that question might be answered. O12 had a relatively small presence on Paradiso at the time. The peacekeeping forces of Bureau Aegis were dwarfed compared to the vast deployments of all the other powers. However, O12 did perform a vital role by providing neutral ground and coordination between all of the powers, especially once the combined army invaded in the year 60. Two large mountain ranges in the north and south of the island were split by a large central valley dominated by Lake Antella. FLAMIA Island had warm summers and temperate, rainy winters, cloudy and windy and not ideal for resource extraction. The northern half of the island was controlled by Jing, the central by the international powers, and the south by PanOceania. In the north, there is the Zhurong Artificial Island project, and its massive geothermal power plant. Zhurong Island was relatively small, but Jing relied on it to power much of its holdings in Australia. Sagres Island was also joined by a highway and was dominated by its large orbital link beacon. PanOceania built it between the first and second phases of the Neo-Colonial Wars as a monitoring station that could dominate the southern hemisphere of the planet. However, it stuck out like a sore thumb, and it was very vulnerable to anti-aircraft attacks. Most of the anti-aircraft artillery was removed by O12 once the combined army invaded and placed higher up on Mount Skelion. Sagres Island was connected to the coastal town of Terrigal via a heavy, reinforced highway. Further north of Terrigal was the Central Valley. O12 claimed jurisdiction over the entire island. It only had direct control over the central area. Lake Antella was therefore home to a Bureau Aegis facility, as well as an Ariadnan expeditionary force. AEF units used this location, far from the front line, to train and integrate with the other human sphere powers. Nearby was Agoge Center, a training and biogenesis facility for members of Aleph's Steel Phalanx Division. This international territory also included the seasonally habited Anza Island, which was occasionally home to O12 dignitaries and international staff. On the mainland, the tohaa, Trinomial, and O12 worked together to build the Naruma Advanced Hospital Complex. Finally, the west of the island was home to the small city of Tianxian. Islam, together with the nomads, conquered the city during the last days of the war and used it to completely dominate the orbital trade in the southern half of Paradiso, and by extension, the Paradiso system itself. The Islamite government had a very light touch after their conquest, as per the instructions of the Diwan al-Paradiso. They did not rename the city, they did not force their culture or government on the citizens, and they assisted in the relocation of any resident who wished to leave the city, providing free transport for individuals and their possessions. Haq-Islam wanted to protect its investment, not milk it dry. Suffice it to say, the island was filled to the brim with soldiers and was more well defended than it appeared. When the combined army attacked, they imagined that the human powers would engage in internecine conflicts that would make them easy pickings, and the initial assault took over much of the central and southern island. However, before the combined army could fortify their holdings, the human powers engaged in a number of somewhat uncoordinated but lethal and massive counterattacks. The G5 nations are always stuck in a quagmire of petty disputes, but they're very well-armed disputes. And speaking of disputes, guess what? I figured out how to get my AdSense working, so I'll make almost nothing this month, and that's okay. But if you want to actually support me and incentivize me, there are two things you can do. You can give me a like and a comment, and if possible, share this with any other friends who you think maybe played in Flamestrike. And also, check out my Patreon. That's right, I did it. I did it like every other influencer. I started a Patreon. This one is per video and not per month, so you won't get charged unless I'm producing more content. Anyway, back to the vid. Sagres Island's orbital tracking station was one of the many targets by the combined army assault teams. PanOceania defenders did manage to hold them off, in no small part thanks to the presence of a Jotun tag regiment already there. By the end of the battle, PanOceania had managed to defend all of its southern holdings. They had deployed in depth and completely blunted the assault by the combined army, and were able to easily counterattack and force the aliens off the southern portion of the island. The Blues' strategy only makes sense if you're the number one power on the sphere. See, they have the biggest population and the biggest economy, so Pano can therefore sustain far more losses in the pursuit of victory. Every battle they fought to a stalemate was really a win, because Pano can simply win more battles thanks to their unprecedented scale. While I'm sure they would have wanted to capture Zhurong or Tianxian, they kept Jing from consolidating their hold on the island, which had been a key priority for nearly 2 decades. Farther north at the city of Tianxian, Haq-Islam saw the city fall to a rapid combined army strike, and the Sword of Allah vigorously defended their holdings against combined army raids, Jing, and even a nomad propaganda campaign intended to secure more favorable status for Tunguskan businesses in the city. However, local forces were not impressed by a digital invasion. Tianxian and Aranda spaceport were both recovered and continued their role as a small but valuable center of trade after the conflict. Agoge Center and Camp Antella were joint projects of Aleph, O12, and the Ariadne Expeditionary Force. The initial assault by the combined army focused on these sites. Forces of the EI took over the instruction facility at Agoge through a perfectly planned and executed operation, with the intent to seize or recover an Aleph node. Although Aleph and the Ariadnes did succeed in fending off the Morat assault, it left a bitter taste in the mouths of many Ariadnes. Massive propaganda campaigns launched by Aleph portrayed the AEC as backward and in need of modern instruction, with Aleph creating fictitious scenarios wherein the Ariadnes needed to be rescued by Steel Phalanx, or worse, implying that the low-tech Ariadnes were responsible for attacking Aleph in blue-on-blue incidents. In reality, the Ariadnes acquitted themselves very well, as did the attacking Morats. One incident saw Commander Frostfire report on a Suryat team that faced certain death, allowing himself to be targeted by an Ariadne Katyusha missile launcher in order to allow the rest of his fire team to maneuver to cover. Anza and the nearby Naruma Medical Center were sparsely populated. Anza Island had been settled by Ujingi's colonists, but abandoned due to its distance from the main island, leaving swaths of prefabricated buildings and colonial infrastructure. O12 repurposed many of these for a part-time governmental headquarters and a joint civilian settlement with a noticeably international character. Anza, however, became a brutal free-for-all when targeted by a series of multilateral raids by the combined army. These raids were actually designed to sow confusion and discord, rather than outright conquest. Morats and Shasvasti used airborne insertion, as well as a rare sub-aquatic landing force that used the rarely seen Morat naval troops. When the smoke cleared, armies from Haq-Islam and Jing had secured the island for O12. Naruma Medical Center on the mainland was actually targeted by Jing in an attempt to secure Tohaa biomedical science. Their black operation teams ended up fighting off a great many Morats in indoor close-quarters combat within the hospital complex. Jing's predilection for melee training and power-armored troops ended up making for a rare upset against Morat warriors. The Zhurong power plant seemed easily defensible, while also being somewhat important to the State Empire. That gave it a sense of invulnerability. A series of nomad military incursions onto the island first went unnoticed, then ignored, and then denied. The Corregidorans that had taken control of the power plant were convinced that they were surrounded and defeated until the moment they realized they had won. See, despite an intense propaganda campaign, the nomad nation had secured Zhurong from Jing, which would then spend months refusing to admit that they had ever lost control of the station. To this day, the nomads have refused to return control of Zhurong Station and denied electricity to much of the Yingxian region. It would have been convenient for all of the powers if the question of FLAMIA Island could be totally resolved. Instead, it remained a divided territory. PanOceania continued to dominate the south, Hak-Islam controlled the city in the west, O12 scaled back its presence after the conflict, as did the battered forces of the Tohaa Trident. There was one noticeable loser though. Jing had completely failed at its intention of reclaiming the island, in part thanks to the cooperation of Hak-Islamite nomad commanders who blunted all of their clandestine operations. The loss of the Zhurong artificial island and power plant was a serious blow to their presence on Paradiso itself. With Jing forced off the island, the State Empire suffered a humiliating defeat. They would soon engage in some very high-risk actions to reclaim their prestige. They'd do anything to thumb the eyes of PanOceania, and especially the nomads. This is the end of the video. I recently launched that Patreon, and I am unsure why so many people backed me, but people did, and that's cool. Am I supposed to read out some patron names here? Like Playing the Enemy? Or Ignovus, who was the person who got me to start this Patreon? I don't know. I can't thank you guys enough. Stay tuned, because I'm doing a video people have been asking for a while, and I'm setting some groundwork for it. And in the meantime, I also want to hear what your idea is for a future online campaign. That is all. See ya. Thanks.